This is Military Matters, Election Edition. I'm Rod Rodriguez. Honestly, we had a completely different episode planned for you all, but after some careful consideration, we thought it best to postpone that episode till after the election. Now, the truth of the matter is that right now, this election is on everyone's minds, and for good reason. It's just the decision that determines your commander-in-chief, the one person who can send us to war, declare peace, and make you wear a silly hat if he or she so pleases. Now, I'm hesitant to talk about this. I'm a reservist myself, so politics and the military do not mix. I did vote, but I'm not going to tell you who I voted for, and I'm not going to ask who you voted for. I only hope that you did. Right now, tens of thousands of military ballots are being counted, and as close as this race looks, it's very likely that our voice, the military voice, will be heard and will be pivotal. For now, all we can do is sit back and watch the process. Well, we would be sitting back and watching the process, except this isn't like any other election in recent memory. Right now, the National Guard in several states are standing by to deal with the fallout of the election results. There's a serious tension in the air, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're sitting on. It feels like there are folks on both sides, on the edge, and ready to explode. There are already reports that the National Guard is being called into Portland, Oregon to stop widespread violence. Civil unrest. That term should absolutely stop you in your tracks and make you think about where we are as a country. We have uniformed service members on standby to stop Americans from ripping apart their own communities out of anger and frustration with the political process. Store shelves are once again looking bare because folks are scared they won't be able to find groceries in a week. This cannot be the new normal for America. A lot of people are talking about martial law and the Posse Comitatus Act, or PCA. These are no longer terms existing in the what if. They are now terms that have everything to do with today and tomorrow. So what I'd like to do is replay a part of our The Army Goes to Washington episode with former Senior Counselor at Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, Kevin Carroll, and the Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston. At the time of this interview, the riots surrounding George Floyd were at their height, the White House was threatened with being overrun, and President Trump had made a famous or infamous walk to St. John's Church after police and National Guard cleared Lafayette Square of protesters. Then, like now, folks wanted to know the legality of making such orders and what it all meant for America.
Most of the times it's been done in the past, it's been done at the request of a governor and not over the head of a governor, although there are exceptions to that, such as the desegregation of schools in Little Rock, Arkansas, back in the 1950s. But it's an extremely serious step, especially if it's taken over the heads of the governor, or in the case of Washington, D.C., the mayor. And I think it would be inadvisable at this time.
That's attorney Kevin Carroll.
My name's Kevin Carroll. I'm a litigation partner at the law firm of Wiggin and Dana. My last government job was serving as a senior counselor to Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly. And I'm a veteran. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the military today, but I am a veteran.
So what is the litmus test to determine whether a state should have active duty troops deployed to it?
What the courts have usually looked to is whether or not the federal courts are still in operation and whether or not federal court orders are being enforced. So for the example of Eisenhower sending troops to Little Rock back in the 1950s, that was because a federal court order to desegregate the schools wasn't being enforced. The mayor, the governor, the adjutant general of the state National Guard said they wouldn't help. And U.S. Marshals were an insufficient force to get it done. So they had to send in the 101st. The way it's usually done would be an example from 1992 during the LA riots. You had, I believe, almost 65 citizens killed in the city over a period of just a few days. And the governor of California at the time, Pete Wilson, and President Bush 41 agreed, this is serious enough, we need to send in some federal forces. Something that's not well known, they sent the 7th Infantry down from Fort Ord, and they sent some 1st Marine Division unit up from Camp Pendleton. And the person leading the Marine Battalion was future Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly.
Antifa, or anti-fascist, has been blamed by Attorney General William Barr and President Trump for a lot of the rioting and has been accused of organizing violence against police officers and destroying the communities around protests. The president recently tweeted that Antifa would be labeled a terrorist organization. Normally, terror organizations are outside actors from another country, but this one would be a domestic terror organization.
There is no provision to designate groups in the United States as domestic terrorist organizations. The FBI has lots of domestic terrorism cases against white extremists, against black extremists, against environmental extremists, animal rights extremists, anti-abortion extremists. And to the Bureau's credit, they really are very punctilious about not interfering with First Amendment speech. And when people talk about designating domestic terrorist some domestic organization as a terrorist organization, I think they're on very, very dangerous ground or very slippery slope.
So when we start labeling domestic organizations as terrorists, we open a door to politicizing any organization. Let's say it's a Democratic administration. They could theoretically brand the NRA or any opposing organization as terrorists. The same could be done for political opponents. That's the slippery slope that Kevin's talking about. This will no doubt be argued by lawyers on several sides before a decision is made as to what gets labeled what.
One of the questions we received numerous times was, what was the difference between active duty troops being deployed within the U.S. and martial law? Aren't they the same thing?
Great question. So one thing that I think the administration hasn't really thought through is that if federal troops are asked to keep order on the streets, the Fourth Amendment still applies to them. So the Fourth Amendment protects American citizens against unreasonable seizures. And the Supreme Court has found in Tennessee versus Garner and other cases that an act of force is a seizure in a sense, which makes sense. I put my hands on you, grab you, put you in custody. The military still has to follow the rules of the police. It's not like they have an extra card where they can use more force than somebody else. And this was brought into stark relief back in the 90s. The Clinton administration had a bad idea to deploy Marines on the southwest border under Joint Task Force 6 to look at drug trafficking organizations. And a Marine sniper shot a shepherd boy, a little teenager with a .22 rifle, and killed him. And the Marine was prosecuted by the local district attorney under Texas state law. So it's not as if there's some pass that the military gets if they do this. As far as martial law would be in the cases where the federal courts can no longer operate. So you'd have to go back to the Civil War, and even then it was very narrow distinctions. If you had the Union Army operating in Mississippi, during the siege of Vicksburg, they could carry out martial law because you had a full-on insurrection. The United States courts were not in operation, and if the U.S. Army found you committing a crime, you could bring a civilian before a military tribunal. That was not allowed in the border states, for example. And the key case is Ex parte Milligan, which involved a Confederate sympathizer in, I believe it was Baltimore, who was tried by a military tribunal. And the Supreme Court found that was not lawful. The federal courts were in operation in Baltimore, even though, there was, obviously the Confederate invasion of Maryland in 1862 and so forth that ended in Antietam. So it would be an absolutely extraordinary case in which martial law had to be imposed in the United States that we haven't seen since 1865.
During my interview with Kevin, I was interested in knowing more about a soldier's right to question a potentially unlawful order. How would a soldier go about questioning an order to, for example, shoot into a crowd?
You have a responsibility not to follow illegal orders, an affirmative responsibility. And I'll give you an example. I believe the order to clear Lafayette Park of peaceful protesters who are not in violation of curfew to facilitate a photo op by the President of the United States was an illegal order and should not have been carried out. President Trump has twice given an illegal order, including in recent days, stating treat people who are throwing rocks as if they had rifles.
Kevin is referring to an immigration speech in 2018 in which the president stated that the military would treat thrown rocks from Mexican citizens at the border as weapons. When they throw rocks, like they did at Mexico military and police, I say consider it a rifle.
It would be a unconstitutional, unreasonable, unlawful use of force that could get somebody thrown in state or federal prison. So illegal orders are given. President Trump, I think, has given them recently. And service members should be aggressive about pushing back and seeking legal counsel and speaking to their inspectors general and elected representatives about it.
I'm not a lawyer, but Kevin Carroll is. This is his professional opinion and not one that reflects anyone else. This is a serious assessment of the situation, a situation that I and Mr. Carroll were not at. I'm a huge believer in that nothing is ever so cut and dry, black and white. What happened at Lafayette Park is no doubt being investigated, as it has become a very controversial event. But I was curious what happens if a soldier carries out an unlawful order unwittingly, that is, he or she doesn't realize it's illegal, but it later comes to light that it was. Are they legally responsible if they were following orders?
I believe they are. Under a 1971 case, Bivens versus 6 unidentified federal narcotics officers. I would think that good counsel and good lawyers would encourage any legal action to be taken against Secretary Esper, rather than some E3. But yeah, they're at a legal risk, and they shouldn't have obeyed that illegal order. And you're taking a risk of criminal prosecution or a civil judgment that you're going to have to pay yourself if you obey an illegal order that isn't even colorably legal. And I think saying we got to gas and club the protesters because the president wants to do a photo op, everybody should have known wasn't legal on his face.
I remember being told over and over and over again that I could question any order if I think it's illegal. And thankfully, I was never put in a position that I've ever considered an order questionable. And I want to believe that I would have the courage to speak up and say something if I had. But for those DC Guard members and the police at Lafayette Square who had boots on the ground, well, I'd want to hear their side of it, to know what really happened. And also, it's not like an E5 or E7 gave you an order from the commander. The whole thing was high-level folks getting orders from the commander-in-chief. So you're going to tell the President of the United States, no? That's tough.
Well, I think I have two inspirations.
Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston.
Our number one is, for the soldiers, active guard and reserve, we want to protect the people of the United States. We really don't want to police the people of the United States. Specifically for the active duty, that's, we don't normally do a lot of training on those types of events. So that's what's running through my mind at that moment. We want to protect the people of the U.S., not police them. But I'm also a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. So the other things that were running through my mind were that could be my son or daughter on the other side of that line, and they just want to have their voices heard. So when I think about, I guess, both perspectives, and I can empathize with both perspectives, the people want to be heard, and we need to protect them so they can have their rights to be heard.
Sergeant Major Grinston has been vocal about his feelings and perspectives towards the state of our country and the Army's potential mission against protesters and rioters. He's spoken out not only as a service member, but also as a biracial person who, by his own accounts, has struggled with racial identity growing up half black and half white in Alabama.
Sergeant Major Grinston is one of many military leaders who have come forward to support the military and to share their opinions and perspectives. Recently, former Secretary of Defense and retired Marine General James Mattis, in an interview with The Atlantic, shared a harsh rebuke of the president's handling of the country's rising racial tensions and the use of the military within the U.S. Since that interview, other notable retired military members have come forward publicly disagreeing with the president. I asked Sergeant Major Grinston if he was concerned at all that service members might perceive these open disagreements with the country's leadership as an open door to publicly criticize their own leaders. the Army or the military?
I would just use, the DOD guidelines on how to be vocal. You just kind of follow the general rules. I'm okay with those, voicing their frustrations. And in the message, I said to soldiers and leaders that we need to listen. And maybe some people, if they don't exactly get, the right way to voice, that individual's frustrated and he or she wants to say something. They want to reach out, and it's emotional and it's passionate. And I understand. I get the same emotion and passion right now. So follow the guidelines, but if you want to speak out, speak out.
Earlier in the show, we talked with attorney Kevin Carroll about lawful orders and what that meant for service members. Sergeant Major Grinston wants troops to remember that there are numerous avenues to exercise your right and duty to question a potentially unlawful order.
Well, I'm a soldier, and if we have lawful orders, we have to follow lawful orders. It's just that there's a way, if you're concerned with something the chain of command does, that you can voice a complaint. We have open door policies. You have other things. I can't speak for people that have out of the military and all these other things. I can just speak for, as a soldier perspective. It goes back to what I was saying. If you need to listen, and there is a way to do that. Every unit has an open door policy, and we have other people that we can talk to. There's all kinds of mediums that if you have a concern, that you can voice those concerns with what you have. But bottom line, all the other things, I try to stay out of the politics.
Politics and media have been central players in the nation's civil unrest. I wanted to know if there was anything that the media was getting wrong. There was something that Sergeant Major Grinston wanted to get the record straight on.
I think what's portrayed isn't always what is shown on the media, is how we are safeguarding the American people as best we can, given the task that we've been asked to do. So there's not one specific thing, is that I just wish we would tell both sides of the story from the military perspective. But, the nation right now is struggling with this complex issue, and the Army is struggling with a complex issue. So I think it's going to take some time. I don't see gross negligence and misrepresentation from the media. It's a difficult topic, and the active guard and reserves are in a difficult situation on each side.
These difficult times have presented leaders with unique challenges. Part of that challenge has been having to discuss complex and volatile subjects like race, equality, and what it means to be an American.
Anytime that we can, talk about the Army, this is a difficult time, but, that's why, that's kind of why we have some leaders in the Army that we need to, sometimes we have to talk about those difficult things. You just can't shy away from it. And I think that's part of the message, is taking the time to talk about it. Don't internalize it. Talk about it, and then listen, and then when necessary, take a little action. And I think that's important.
No matter who's elected, we all have a lot of healing to do as a country. I implore you, please don't be part of the problem that is violence. Our National Guard and our law enforcement have their hands full. They don't need any more to deal with. Encourage your friends and families to use cooler heads and remain situationally aware. I fear this isn't the last time we'll be hearing about PCA and martial law. I only hope that if we have to discuss this again, that it's in retrospect of days long gone, and that we're thinking of ways to never have to revisit these discussions again. I want to give a huge shout out to Desmon Farris, whose voice you heard on this episode. He's moved forward with some of his own awesome projects, and we wish him the absolute best. I want to thank Kevin Carroll and Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston. It's just unfortunate that these interviews have once again become so applicable, but a huge thanks to them nevertheless. This episode was written and produced by Rod Rodriguez, executive produced by Benjamin Bateman and Joel Fleming. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast to get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes. No spin, no BS, just news you can trust. Promo code podcast, stripes.com, save 50%. This episode was also sponsored by Cheap Tickets. Go to cheaptickets.com/military. Get 18% off hotels. Offer valid for active duty service members, veterans, military reserves, and the National Guard. Boy, they're going to need it after this year. The best trips in life are cheap. Cheaptickets.com/military. I'm Rod Rodriguez, and I'll see you at the next episode.